Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Stephen Hodgson, and I'm the Head of Publishing and Syllabus Development at AMEB. I'm very happy to be here today for the Flute Series 4 Grade 5 and Grade 6 Teachers Workshop, which will be presented by Gradebook Consultant for Series 4, Jocelyn Fazzone. During this teacher's workshop, Jocelyn will take you through the new grade 5 and 6 books, covering some of the principles and thinking behind repertoire selection for these publications, and covering the contents of both books, sharing some of what appeals about each piece and how they might be used in the teaching studio to help develop aspects of technique and musicianship at this level. If you have any questions on the material presented in this workshop, please do send them through via the chat or Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window. There will be some time set aside at the end of the presentation to run through questions that might be of general interest. We'll also attempt to answer them within the chat in real time if possible. These later grade books, the grade 5 and grade 6 books, represent a vast amount of work from quite a large team of contributors. And as well as thanking Jocelyn Fazzone for her tireless and expert contribution to the whole of Series 4, I'd also like to thank Peter Bartels, who reviewed each selection in all of the publications in great detail, providing feedback on grading suitability and general appeal. So thank you so much to Peter for playing such a significant role in these books. At various stages, the grade 5 and 6 books were also reviewed by a further panel of specialist teachers, including Janine Grantham, Greg Lee, and Sylvie Leprohon. So thank you to those teachers also for your feedback throughout the process. And additionally, each of the Baroque works in these books appear with newly commissioned realizations of the continuo part. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Donald Nicholson, Janet Tondas, John O'Donnell, and Aaron Halliard for their expertise and their expert realizations. I'll run through further thanks to the publishing team at the end of the workshop, but there was a vast team of proofreaders, editors, typesetters, etc., that I'd like to thank later on. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our gradebook consultant for Series 4, Jocelyn Fazzone. Although for many of you, Jocelyn will need no introduction. Jocelyn has had a long and multifaceted musical career. She's a well-known teacher of flute and has received many awards for her teaching achievements from AMEB New South Wales. She teaches flute for the Sydney Conservatorium High School, has a large private teaching studio, and has taught for the University of New South Wales, Wesley Institute, and Sydney Conservatorium Open Academy. She is the AMEB New South Wales Chief Woodwind Examiner, a federal AMEB examiner, and frequently adjudicates for music competitions around Sydney. And Jocelyn has performed on flute with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, Queensland Symphony Orchestra, Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra, and the Australian Opera and Ballet Orchestra. She is a founding member of the Windfall Sextet and frequently works coaching chamber music for the Amateur Chamber Music Society and Conservatorium High School. She's appeared as featured presenter on aspects of flute pedagogy and in performance masterclasses for the Australian Flute Festivals, Flute Society of New South Wales, and Sydney Conservatorium, and has been an invited guest presenter for the Victorian Flute Guild and Flute Society of South Australia. Welcome, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for being here and for your spectacular contribution to these new books.
Thank you so much, Steve. Welcome, everybody. Hi, I'm sure I know quite a few of you, and for those who I don't know, hello and welcome. It's so great to have the new Series 4 Flute grades 5 and 6 books up and running, and I hope you're enjoying them as much as me and my own students. In putting these books together, I very much wanted to keep the continuity between all the level 1 books, so that's preliminary to grade 4, continuing with the same processes and fundamental aims. And these were and are, firstly, that each piece had good educational merit and was a musically worthy composition, and that every piece was enjoyable or is enjoyable to play, something that students really want to play and teachers want to teach. We have to encourage our students' enthusiasm and love for playing, obviously, and through the AMEB gradebooks, this is such an important aspect to consider in repertoire choices. I wanted to include as wide a range of styles as possible for not only for the appeal, but for the variety and breadth and educational value, so that students, number one, can play things that resonate with them, but number two, they can delve into styles which they're not very familiar with. And of course, having a good progression of levels going through grade 5 and through grade 6 to prepare for upper level 2 exams, 7, 8 and certificate. So by educational merit, which is appropriate to each grade, I considered the following things. So instrumental range, appropriate to grade 5 and 6. Within each list and between the lists, using a variety of keys, time signatures, tempo, rhythmic elements, articulations and dynamics that were appropriate for the grade, and also provide a little extra challenge for the grade. The pieces had to be of the right length, the AMEB exam, and have playable piano parts. Quite important for our beautiful accompanists. Of course, overall, they had to be at the correct technical level. Although there's a range of technical level that is suitable within each grade, and different aspects to the technique. So, for instance, some students might find fast fingers or fast articulations difficult, but tone production, breath control easy, and vice versa. So there's a range of material to suit and to develop. Also, from an interpretational point of view, I wanted there to be a good range in terms of musical sophistication. So this is such a pivotal stage, early level 2, which is grades 5 and 6. Our students, as we all know, have developed their fundamentals, both technique and musicality. And grades 5 and 6, as I say, are quite pivotal in developing from that basic player into a player of greater sophistication, nuance, musical awareness, so on and so forth. Saying that though, not all students, of course, develop at the same length, at the same speed rather, and particularly grade 5, we see a lot of students who are really still quite immature, and there's plenty of scope for that type of student within grade 5 in particular, but even grade 6 in particular. Other students develop sophistication much earlier, and I wanted to give them the opportunity to develop this aspect and explore music, which would challenge them in this way. I wanted to just point out a couple of pieces within the grades 5 and 6 which demonstrate this contrast of material. So in grade 5 list C, for the student who is who needs a more straightforward approach, maybe not so mature yet, you have the Kronke Gavotte, which really is an extension of a grade 4 type of interpretation, tends to play itself, doesn't need any great nuance. Whereas the much more sophisticated or mature, or dare I say, somewhat sensitive student might find the foot pastoral in that list a great challenge and really enjoy putting the delicacy and expression into this piece. And the same would go in grade 6. So for the more sophisticated student, they have the opportunity of playing the Debussy Le Petit Berger. This is grade 6 list C, which requires so much control and nuance, but expressive subtlety as well. Rather more straightforward in the same list is the Glinka Waltz, which has a few technical demands, but interpretationally is rather straightforward. So another contrast within grades 5 and 6, within the parameters of those grades, is there is a range of difficulty. Some pieces might appear a little harder than others. This is a normal process, and of course it's impossible to get every piece to the same level of difficulty, but realizing that different aspects are difficult for different students is important, and an important part of development. And there's enough material within the books that teachers can use pieces for their students' study to develop such aspects that they might not be quite so comfortable with, but then they might choose for the exam purposes for the student to play much more within their comfort zone. Now there are two pieces I just wanted to highlight here, which superficially might not seem terribly difficult for the grade. The first of these is in grade 5, list D. This is page 42, 43, and it's by Tomasi, Le Petit Chevrier Course. I'm just going to play a little bit of this piece, but before I do, it's quite a manageable piece for students of a grade 5 level from the technical point of view. However, it gives the more basic student the chance to explore other aspects in their playing, such as the sudden changes of character and tempo, different characterizations, for instance, that rather declamatory opening phrase which recurs a couple of times, the echo effect, the expressive moderato, and the lively and energetic allegretto section. I'm just going to show you a little bit of this piece. Here's the opening. Then the moderato is simply played with lovely expression. Etc. into the sudden change into the allegretto. Etc. I think students will really enjoy playing this piece. I think it will resonate with them, and it ought to give the perhaps less technically advanced student an opportunity to build their confidence and soloistic approach to performance. Another piece that I'd like to point out, which superficially might seem not quite so difficult as some of the other repertoire, is the list A study called Empire Building by Adam Scott. So the notes are not all that difficult, but what this requires out of a player is a really substantial sound, the ability to control vibrato in a stylistically appropriate manner. It requires just an immense amount of flair and the ability to let yourself go. It will appeal to the real extrovert and takes a great deal of stylistic understanding to bring off. And we also have the opportunity in this piece for students to experiment a little bit with the addition of similar types of acciacchaturas and slides which are in the original score. I'm always amazed what students can achieve when they're given the opportunity. So to have some pieces which are not technically a struggle for students and develop other aspects is a wonderful thing in a book. Just a brief word about where I sourced all the repertoire. I've got a very large music collection at home of flute repertoire. I went to the music publishers, De Vera, Howell Leonard, and to the AMEB Federal collection of flute music, which is pretty extensive. The Sydney Conservatorium Library and good music stores were also helpful, including Syrinx Music, a wonderful flute music source. IMSLP is always a valuable source, and our beautiful Australian resources of the Australian Music Centre and Wirrapang were also most helpful. I just wanted to point out that just like the preliminary to grade 4 books, we were able to include works by female and Australian composers. A note about the editorial editions, which are in grey, and these will be with metronome speeds, articulations, breaths, some dynamics. These are recommendations only. You don't have to take them literally. In putting together the books, some modifications of pieces were made, and I'll just point out a couple of examples of these. For instance, in the grade 5 list C, Bizet Intermezzo, which comes together as a pair with the Seguidilla. It has been shortened, obviously. It's a piece we all know well, and the key's been changed from E flat major to D major. A little more user-friendly, and I think students will find it much more appealing than the way it used to be, which was the original work played in E flat major without the addition of the lively and characterful second movement. And in the grade 6, list A, we have the Kummer study. This is in the key of G minor. Now, the original key for this is F sharp minor. I chose to put this into G minor so there'd be a better spread of keys. There's quite a few works in the grade 6 book with 3 sharps. And it's also a little bit more user-friendly, so that students haven't got all these repeated low C sharps and top F sharps. So I think students will be more encouraged to actually play the piece, which is a really exciting study and something which will help greatly to build their technique and musical characterizations, I should say. So I'm going to talk about the styles within the 2 books, the grade 5 and 6 books. As I said before, I chose as wide a range of styles as possible. We're very fortunate again in our list A pieces for these grades to have 5 pieces. Normally it would only be 4. In the bad old days it was only 3. I've chosen in continuation of the level 1 studies, I've included one earlier piece, a Baroque early classical piece. I've chosen 2 romantic studies in keeping with the bulk of our study material, which comes from that era. 1 piece of contemporary classical music and a contemporary popular style piece. In the grade 5, it's a ragtime. In the grade 6, gospel style. And this is a new style for our books. I think it's a great piece. In list B, C, and D, we have our 4 pieces. In list B, I've included a romantic style piece in each of these. Sorry, not romantic style, correction, a classical style piece, sonata movement, sonatina movement. Actually, these were both written in the Romantic period, but are very clearly classically centered. And Baroque pieces with variety And just noting that I have included in the grade 6 beautiful 2 movements from a French Baroque sonata by Naudot. And this it shows the increasing sophistication needed and to be acquired as students progress through the grades, with the French style being much more detailed, nuanced, a lot of delicacy, and in some ways technically rather fussy with all the ornamentation. Just a word about that. In that second movement, some of the little ornaments we've marked as optional, and this is also to make the piece a little more user-friendly for this grade. Moving on to list C. Lots of contrasts and character pieces in these lists in the book. So grade 5, we've got the contrasts of the salon style in the Anderson Tanzlied, and we've got the delicate, expressive, lyrical style in the Pastoral by Foot, and we have the well-known Bizet Intermezzo and Seguidio for a real character appeal, and a much more straightforward gavotte by Kronka, which I mentioned earlier. And grade 6 explores styles perhaps even to a greater extent, which is relevant for our progressing students. So the first piece is the Malagueña, I don't speak Spanish, which needs a lot of rubato, a lot of individual flair and understanding of the genre, and is best interpreted rather by the student if it's played with the accompaniment part early on. It needs that interplay, including the pacing and harmonic understanding when deciding on the interpretation here. Impressionist, we have the beautiful Debussy piece, the French Romantic style, which is so important to flute players in the Gobert Oriental, and we've got the Bravura Romantic style there with the Glinka Waltz. And moving on to list D, in both grades, I've included, which is also something that I've continued from the level 1 books. There's one popular contemporary style piece in each of these, and both of these just happen to be by our wonderful Australian composer Andy Firth. I've included one classical contemporary style piece in each, a piece of Australian pictorial style by our beautiful Australian composer Carolyn Morris. These 2 movements in each grade come from the same suite actually, and really should appeal to the imagination of students. And one piece in each of these grades which require more freedom. We talked about the Tomasi in the list D grade 5, and in the list D grade 6 choice we have the Australian Autumn Song by Constable, with its cadenzas alternating with the measured, beautiful melodic material. So something for everybody and something for great learning experiences. Now, the developmental aspects through these advancing grades is really important so that students can be prepared to move beyond these 2 grades into the more sophisticated levels, grades 7, 8, on to the certificate of performance and so on. So I definitely put a lot of consideration into this. As I said before, allowing for the fact that some students need pieces that are not too hard to fathom, something more straightforward. I'm just going to name some of these and some of the developmental aspects that I considered. So first of all, the technically based aspects, what we need to acquire as we get into the advanced grades is great breath control, breath management. And so the phrases here are often quite long, or a little bit, I should say, incessant, with not much opportunity to take deep breaths. And I'm going to point a couple of these, highlight a couple of these pieces for you. So in terms of breath management, I'll point out in the grade 5 book, the List A Garibaldi study. Now this piece, it's on page 10 to 11, pages 10 and 11 rather. And we have here an extremely long section in which there's no rests at all, starting from the upbeat into bar 24, going all the way through to bar 40 with no rests. I'm just going to play you this. Quite a long way to go without having somewhere to stop and catch your breath. When I'm teaching students this type of thing, my approach is always to take one large breath before the start of the extended passage and then top up frequently so that they never run empty. And in that way, they're able to keep a sense of continuity between all the little phrases to form one large phrase. Another piece that I'll highlight in terms of the advancing concept, or not so much concept, the practicalities of what we need to do as flute players, is in grade 6, the List A Kohler study, which is on page 10 and 11. Very few rests at all in this piece. Lots of breathing can be done in the staccatos. And if you look at the breath marks that are on there are some on there. But I personally encourage students in the opening phrase, type of ID where you have lots of staccatos, to breathe even more frequently than is marked, so that they're breathing almost between every staccato quaver. Etc. So that they're always building their breath, they're expelling the air and breathing in about the same amount of air. In that way they don't hyperventilate. Now the middle section is even more challenging for breathing because it's not staccato, so you can't use that type of breathing. It's a bit slower. It's a bit more challenging as far as blowing out with the slurs. And a little bit of rubato that's written in with the ritenutos that are marked can be good opportunities for the students to catch their breath in a way. But again, they need to be able to keep going so that there's not any gaps in tempo, and to make it musically cohesive, work their breathing into the rhythm that's already marked. It's quite easy for students in this type of thing to get breathless and almost not be able to continue, in fact. So breathing was a big aspect in looking at the material. Another technical issue that I felt was important was to develop students' ability to do unusual slur patterns, particularly the slurring onto the beat, which some students find extraordinarily difficult. Now, these tend to be students who are not quite so rhythmically natural, and these students equate the use of the tongue with where a beat is. And this slur pattern happens in quite a number of the pieces. In fact, the study that I just played, the Garibaldi, that section, in fact, has that technique. The next study in the book, too, the Kolar study, has exactly the same sort of. This is not the one, Maxine. That's okay. I'll just play you a little bit of this. So this is attributed to Kolar. That sort of thing, which students do find a little bit difficult in conjunction with maintaining the rhythmic integrity. And that's quite challenging. And there are also many examples in the grade 6 book, one of them being in that beautiful foot pastoral in the list C, which I will just point to now. This piece, grade 5, grade 5 book, foot pastoral, and I just turn to that. It is on page 32, and such a beautiful piece. And then we come to bar 30, the end of bar 33, 34, with the almost syncopated entry and then the slurring onto the beats. Here it is. And superficially, such an easy little thing, but it's amazing the number of students who then, if they are foot tappers, start tapping their foot on the offbeat with the tongue stroke. Quite interesting phenomenon. Okay, in grade 6, you have a whole piece based around this, which is the Glinka Waltz, page 34, list C. And here it is. I'll just play a little snippet of it. Etc. Yes, and that's something that we encourage students to work on. Other technical aspects are important to the choice of repertoire in terms of developing where the big intervals, the awkward sort of slur passages, which we need to be able to do as flute players. So if we just bring up the grade 5 list A curler study, which I played a little bit of before, page 12, and we look at the bottom of the page there, bars starting at bar 22, which has got these rather awkward intervals and changes of octaves, and so it goes on. Students will find that really challenging, and that's part of why this study has been included. And even in the non-study pieces, if we refer in the grade 6 book to the list D, Ride of the Brumbies by Morris, and we refer to that page, which is page 45, going down the page, starting at bar 31, you have such an awkward little, a couple of awkward moments where you're slurring through all kinds of intervals, finger changes, and you have to keep the equality of the sound through the changing registers and the somewhat awkward finger changes. So it was important that this type of thing was there so students can develop these techniques. Of course, in general, we see through the grades 5 and then into 6 repertoire selections, increasing general technical abilities, more finger work, more rapid articulation. Legato tongue is something which I demonstrated before actually and forgot to point out in the Tomasi, the grade 5 list C, is needed now at this level. And importantly, students having to develop their understanding of complex rhythms, which you see throughout the material, to a lesser extent in some pieces, and their ability to control rhythms. And I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about here. So going to the grade 5 book, list A, The Side Swiper by Paul Van Ross. We've got the dotted rhythm in the 6/8, which students very often translate by playing a crotchet and 2 semiquavers, and it's repeated over and over again. I'll just play you a little bit of this. And so it goes on. And so this particular dotted rhythm figure happens in quite a few pieces across the 2 books. And is a great learning tool as well as being such a fun piece. This particular study is not only for that aspect, also for grace notes and octave work. And there's some very awkward moments with the grace notes in combination, as I should really say, in combination with the octave changes. And in the same way, different context, is the grade 6 list the Kinza Andante movement, which is page 18. And the rhythmic control that's needed, almost poise, to make this work so that the rhythm is always the same, whether the dotted rhythm is slurred or tongued, no matter what the fingering combinations are. I'll just play you a little bit of this. And particularly as you get down towards the bottom of the page, it's quite awkward going down to those low Gs and being able to retain the absolute strictness of the rhythm. Now, not only did I look at the technical development that we want to see through the grades 5 and 6, but I also considered the interpretational musical development aspects, and with lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities for students. So obvious things that we have is challenges in dynamic. So we need to be able to play louder down the bottom and softer up the top with good tone control, decrescendos and so on and so forth. The students need to develop the ability to do sudden tempo and character changes, and I've already demonstrated that in the list G Tomasi work. And if you turn to the grade 6, page 30-31, the Debussy, Le Petit Berger, the Little Shepherd, several different speeds, modifications of speeds, and little character changes necessary for the student to master this. So you have the lyrical and sweet opening, you have the change of expression with the plus mouvement, and the more expansive au mouvement at bar 12, and back and forward and so on and so forth, with the necessity of the student to manage these tempo changes. And along with that, the students' development to control the pacing, that is the pacing of pauses, which is another thing that we have in the Tomasi piece, but is present in many pieces. But also to do with pacing, that they become aware of starting at a correct tempo, bearing in mind what is to come. And in the grade 5 book, if we turn to the Kronke Gavotte, page 34-35, the temptation for students will be to start the first section of the piece at a tempo that's too fast. However, down the bottom, we have the B section of the piece, which should be faster, but starting at a fast speed at the beginning will give them real difficulties in the A major section. So they need to be able to pace the tempo in the beginning. And likewise, in the grade 6 book, in this A, the tacit study, rondo, which is page 16 and 17, the temptation again here will be to start too fast in the opening phrases, and then coming into the triplets, bars 6 and 7, being unable to maintain the strict tempo through these triplets and play with the clarity of articulation and accuracy of fingerwork. I've included many, well, not many, but several pieces which require interpretive choices and imagination in terms of cadenza passages. And so pulling up in the grade 5 list G, the Firth ballad for Benny, which is page 36, 37, as one of these typical jazzy improvisatory sort of passages from bar 54 onwards, in which the student can really be creative in interpreting the rhythm that's written, notated down. And also in the list D, grade 6, the Constable Autumn Song, page 36, different type of cadenza here, but gives students the freedom to use their imagination in the pacing. I'll just play a little bit of this. And so it goes on. This will be wonderful for students to explore. And of course, there are lots of character pieces around, and this should give students the opportunity to really push their boundaries in terms of interpretation and put their heart into their playing. And I'd like to point out just a couple of these. So grade 5 list D, the burlesque on page 41, should be a great little piece for students to play. I'll just play you a little bit of this. Etc. I think they'll really enjoy that. And that, of course, is coupled with the expressive canzona. And in the grade 7, there's many character pieces, but I wanted to point out the Matthias Allegro Vivace this. coupled with the expressive canzona. And in the grade 7, there's many character pieces, but I wanted to point out the Mache from Sonatina, and a musically straightforward piece, good for the student who isn't quite ready for all of the detail and nuance in their playing, but nevertheless, plenty of character. I'll just play you a little bit of this. Etc. Etc. And some other good skills to be learned in this particular piece, that is the implied meter change 6/8 to 3/4, the cross the beat slurs in bars 2021, articulation on erky notes such as E, which don't speak well. So I do hope you enjoy all of the selections in the book, and that every student finds lots of pieces that not only appeal to them, but help them in their development, and in particular, encourage them to keep playing the flute. And we'd welcome now any questions that you would like to put.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn. There's one question that's just come through, which I think I'll ask first of all. And this is the grade 5 gavotte.
Yes.
Do you have a look at the grade 5 gavotte? Which note do you recommend students begin the trills on, please?
Yes, that's a good question. It's in a Baroque style, but because it's not written in the Baroque period, I begin the trills on the printed note.
And then trilling above, of course.
And of course, drilling to the upper note. I think because of when it was written, if the composer had wanted an upper note trill, I feel that he probably would have notated it in.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. There's a couple of other questions that have come through. If anybody does have a question, please submit that either via the chat. You'll see the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window, or via the Q&A button. We're monitoring both of those, so please do send a question through if you have one now. Two questions that have come through. Firstly, are there recordings available? And I could answer that. We don't have AMEB recordings of these books at this stage. AMEB hasn't traditionally recorded every set of grade books, and under the current circumstances in terms of how the recording industry is, we need to be very careful about the budget spent on recording for all of our publications. So there are no AMEB recordings of these works yet, but there are recordings of most of these works available either commercially in one way or another. Some of the new Australian works, hopefully they will get recorded soon and they'll be available on YouTube and Spotify, but there are no AMEB recordings for these works at this point in time. Similarly, there was a question about the recorded accompaniments. AMEB only releases recorded accompaniments for preliminary through to grade 3, and that's because those are the grades in which you can present for examination using a recorded accompaniment. We felt that it's a little bit too confusing to release recorded accompaniments that you can't use for examination. But even at grade 3, you start to run into ensemble considerations that make using a recorded accompaniment not ideal. Even at grade 3, you're dealing with pauses and caesuras and various different ensemble matters. And so the AMEB board felt that beyond grade 3, really it's a live accompanist that you need to be working with, especially in examinations. Jocelyn, yes.
Oh yeah, just one note about that question. The Autumn Song by Robert Constable, I have actually recorded that, but it's not the same. It's not exactly the same. The composer modified this to fit into the grade book, so it'll give you an idea of how it goes, but it's not exactly the same. Yeah.
And there are a number of works that especially some of the Australian composers have modified in these books so that they better suit the grade, which has been a really useful process, and we really extend our thanks to those composers who were willing to modify their work slightly so that they work better in examination and for these purposes. And the Robert Constable is one of those. We've had another question come through. Can you please explain how you came to attributing the curler study? I can answer that as well. So these studies are featured in other compilations, in other books of pedagogical music, namely that those curler studies are found in 45 Progressive Studies for Flute by Simon Hunt. We embarked on quite a research project to try and locate the source of this study. We looked through all of the works that curler has available around the world in composer's manuscript and also in first edition, and we couldn't find those works in amongst those sources. We also contacted Simon Hunt and his publisher and inquired through that way. So we've attributed them to curler because that is how they are known out in the public. But we weren't able to find a reliable source, so that's why we've said attributed curler rather than we've just listing him as the composer. One question about grade 4 chatterbox rag. So this is the previous series, of course, or the previous book within the series, grade 4 chatterbox rag. Should we play this with swing? Jocelyn, do you want to answer that?
Yes. So a ragtime is not going to be swing, and that's going to be the same as the ragtime that we now have in the grade 5 book.
So that's a stylistic kind of approach in ragtime music, is that it's generally not swung. So thank you very much for that question. So thank you once again, Jocelyn. That was really illuminating. I hope everybody found it very valuable. Really great to see your thinking throughout the selection process and also to delve into those works a little bit. I think that there've been a couple of comments come through about how great the selections are and how interesting they all seem. We've just had another message come through. No, that's fine. So look, that really concludes our AMEB Flute Series for Grade 5 and 6 Teachers Workshop. The publications are now available from local and online music retailers. Once again, I'd like to thank Jocelyn for the enormous amount of work and expertise that have been poured into these 2 books and the 5 books previous in the series. I'd also like to thank again Peter Bartels, who acted as the reviewer for these books, looking at each work in great detail, as well as the AMEB publishing team, Laura Vaughan, who was the project officer for these books, David Howell, our typesetter, and our team of expert proofreaders. Once again, I'd like to thank the Baroque specialists that created the new keyboard realizations for, I think all of the Baroque works in these books have new realizations, which were developed with historically informed performance in mind by real experts across the country. Erin Helliard, Donald Nicholson, John O'Donnell, and Janet Tondas, all of whom are harpsichord players and work in this repertoire every day. I'd also like to thank the behind-the-scenes AMEB team, especially Bernard de Pasquale, our AMEB CEO, and Maxine Day and Fiona Ng for making this online workshop possible. And last, but certainly not least, thank you to everybody who has attended this workshop and contributed by asking questions, but also engaging with these new resources that we're really excited to bring to you. We really hope these new 5 and 6 books, grade 5 and 6 books, serve the flute community as a useful and inspiring resource for years to come. So thank you once more, and goodbye.